Rob Bertholf here. I want to talk on this topic of who changed the Sabbath. In previous videos, I discussed the Sabbath was changed, but I want to bring receipts and show historically who took credit for changing it. So we know if we read that the Sabbath, by definition, is a religious observance, an absence from work. Originally has been carried down the line for the Jewish people from Friday evening until Saturday evening. But then it says, by most Christians on Sunday. And the second definition is a night meeting held by witches. So I think what we see here is that there's two different paths. There is one, which is God's way, and a second, which is not God's way. We're told very clearly in the Bible, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, for in 6 days the Lord made and rested on the earth and the sea and then rested on the seventh day. And more than that, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day. Now we don't see anywhere else in the Bible this being changed or altered, although there's a lot of people that will say, well, it's not that important. It was only made for the Israel. The law is no longer valid. We worship on the day Jesus rose. Paul kept the first day of the week. Every day should be a Sabbath. Like I've been in so many conversations with this. I've heard so many excuses, so many replies, that I literally have like a list of how to look at those. And I recommend you taking the course, Sabbath Truth. We'll go through those. But in this course, I just want to talk specifically about who changed the Sabbath. And a hint, it wasn't God. So a quick little context, we understand that the early, after the first 300 years of Jesus' ministry ended, right, this apostolic church had extended to most of the known world at the time, right, despite the persecution by the Romans as well as the Jews. Christianity, right, was, very dominant. And the thing was that Constantine needed to rule the empire, but he wanted to bring it all together. And so what we see is that Constantine, when he became ruler, the first things he was doing is actually bringing Christianity together. Now, while some people say that Constantine was a Christian, that's heavily disputed because he had a coin on one side, had the letters of Christ, and on the other side had the sun god. So pretty clearly what we see is that he was still very much a pagan. And his goal, the retention of this, was to unite paganism and Christianity together. If he could do that, he could rule the entire region without any real differences. And so this is this idea of creating Dies Solis, or Sunday, as the new Sabbath, merging together paganism and Christianity as the venerable day of the sun. So Constantine published 2 edicts which enjoined the solemn observance of Sunday, a pagan practice. This is just directly right out of history books. We find that Constantine united worshippers of the old and the new into one religion, blending and melting together Christianity and heathenism, and none is more easy to see through than making of his Sunday law. So we find out in 321 that Christian, and this one was 321, but also here we see in 337 how we have more and more laws out that Christians should not be idle on Sabbath, but should work on that day. But the Lord's day they should keep especially honored. They mean the Lord's day, they mean Sunday. So they're saying right here that no longer to keep Sabbath, as God said. We want you to work on Sabbath, and we want you to keep Sunday, right? Well, we found out was Solus Dies, right? So we see here in a decree a few years before, in March 321, that Constantine put out on the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrate and the people in the cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. And what they actually came out, Sabbath persecution, came out of the same thing. So again, Constantine pushed a Sunday worship. Solus Victus, the unconquered sun, by the way, this is all about sun worship, was long considered to be the official sun god of the Roman Empire. And so this whole concept of Constantine, marked the decree of Sunday rest. We keep seeing this. Now, what's interesting though, and I'm going to cover this more in my course on public secrets, if you go check out that video, it's very interesting, is that there was a handoff from pagan Rome to papal Rome. And with this, the lineage of Sol Invictus went with it. So the lineage that's happened all the way back with Nimrod was transferred from pagan Rome to papal Rome. And now we start to see papal Rome the papacy, the Catholic Church, now start to issue also Sunday worship decrees. In Laodicea, we see that Sunday, this is from the mouth of the beast. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationship with God. Sunday is the day of the resurrection. They couldn't find anything else in the Bible they could pin it to, so they used that, but it's not biblical. What they say here is that the day of rest is centered on the Eucharist. Study more into what the Eucharist is. See my course on public secrets on that. Ultimately, what we find here is that they read in the Catechism that Christians should seek recognition on Sundays. And the Sabbath, which represented the completion of the first creation, that's the Saturday, has been replaced by Sunday. And we read that the church celebrates Christ's resurrection as the 8th day, or Sunday, which is rightly called the Lord's Day. So right here we see very clearly that it's the Catholic Church that through continuing pagan history, it changed the day from Saturday to Sunday. All things whatsoever that were prescribed for the biblical Sabbath, so they even acknowledge that Saturday is the biblical Sabbath, we have transferred them to Sunday as being a more authoritative and more highly regarded than the first in rank and more honorable than the Israeli Sabbath. So they don't claim anywhere in there that we did it because Jesus said to, we did it because the disciples said to. No, those are things made up by Protestants to handle ultimately their cognitive dissonance. But this actually, if you go right to the source, it said the church, after changing the day of rest from the Jewish Sabbath, or the 7th day of the week, to the first, made the third commandment refer to as Sunday. Also, by the way, they removed the third commandment. It's actually the fourth commandment, but they removed out idols, so that's why you have that. It's so clear. That's Catholic Encyclopedia. It's so clear. We read here, the Catholic Church, for over 1,000 years before the existence of a Protestant, by virtue of her divine mission, changed the day from Saturday to Sunday. So the Catholic Mirror, back in 1894, published an article that said very clearly, the Catholic Church, by virtue of her divine mission, by being God, changed the day from Saturday to Sunday. We read in here, the Catholic Church in the Council of Laodicea transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. This is just basic history. Question, how did we do this? A change which there was no scriptural authority. So Reverend Keenan in the Doctrinal Catechism admits there was no scriptural authority of doing this, that this was to show the power of the papacy. It rests upon the authority of the Catholic Church and not upon explicit text from the Bible. Pause all these quotes and read the full quotes. Of course, the Catholic Church admits that the change was her act, and the act is the mark of her ecclesiastical power and authority in religious matters. So Cardinal Giermann says, of course we changed it. It's how we can prove that we're the ones in control, that it's not God, it's paganism. It's evident the church has a power to change the commandments. If we consulted the Bible only, we would still have to keep the holy day Sabbath, that is Saturday, with the Jews instead of Sunday. Look, this is straight from the mouth of the dragon, straight from the mouth of the beast. Sunday is a Catholic institution and can be defended only on Catholic principles. This is why when you have a conversation about Sabbath with a Catholic, eventually the Jesuit's going to say, well, it's tradition. And because there's nothing else that it's based on. It's based on tradition. Protestants do not realize that by observing Sunday, they accomplish the authority of the spokesperson of the Catholic Church, the Pope. So by keeping Sunday, Protestants, this is apostate Protestantism, never fully, if you watch my video on the ice cream analogy, never fully escaped out of the papal grasp, out of the pagan grasp. And they're still worshiping on Sunday as a way of saying the Pope's their daddy. Sunday is our mark of authority. The church is above the Bible, and transference of Sabbath observance is proof of that fact. Catholic record, all this comes right out of their archives. The Roman Catholic Church changed the observance of Sabbath to Sunday by right of the divine, infallible authority of her given to her founder, Jesus Christ. So they're saying that Jesus gave them all the authority, that Jesus allowed them to become like God. The Protestant claiming the Bible is to be their only guide of faith has no warrant for observing Sunday. In this matter, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the only consistent Protestant. So the Catholics consider the Seventh-day Adventists as the only consistent Protestant, the only ones protesting. That's interesting. If we look at the Anglicans, right, they say nowhere in the Bible is it laid down that worship should be done on Sunday. They know. They read that not because the Bible, but because the church has said to do it. So again, they're taking tradition over the Bible. Baptist, there was not a command to keep the Sabbath. There was and is a command to keep the holy the Sabbath day, but the Sabbath was not Sunday. They all know this, right? Another Baptist, high ranking, what a pity it comes branded with a mark in paganism and christened with the name of the papal sun god, adopted and sanctioned by the papal apostasy, bequeathed a legacy to Protestantism. So the Baptists are calling out and saying, yeah, it's a shame that we're doing Sunday worship because that's straight out of paganism. We read here, there was never any formal authoritative change. Another Baptist. Here's another Baptist. The sacred name of the seventh day is Sabbath. The fact is too clear to require an argument. Here's another Baptist. The Sabbath was established originally, long before Moses, in no special connection with the Hebrews, but as an institution for all mankind, in commemoration of God's rest, rather than 6 days of creation. It was designed for all the descendants of Adam. Let's switch over to Episcopalian. We have made the change from the seventh day to the first day, from Saturday to Sunday, on the authority of the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church of Christ. Do you get that? Lutheran. We have seen how gradually the impression of the Israeli Sabbath faded from the mind of the Christian church. Here's another Lutheran. The festival of Sunday, like all other festivals, was always only just a human ordinance. Lutheran. But the error in teaching the Sunday has taken place of the Old Testament Sabbath. There's simply no law in the New Testament to that effect. Lutheran. The observance of the Lord's Day, Sunday, is founded not on any command of the church, of God, but on the authority of the church. Methodist. This is John Wesley, by the way, right? Founder. The moral law contained in the Ten Commandments is still active. Every part of this law must remain in force. That includes the fourth commandment. The moral law contained in the Ten Commandments is not to be taken away. Right? There is no passage in telling Christians to keep that day, speaking of Sunday. It must be confessed that there is no law in the New Testament interfering that day. And again, the congressional Sunday, absolutely no authority in the New Testament. I won't speed through the rest of these. There's no commandment in the Bible requiring us to observe the first day of the week, right? Presbyterian, the teaching of Christ confirms the perpetuity of the Sabbath. Into the rest of Sunday is no divine law enters. Presbyterian again, the Lord that even the Christians were bound to the strict observation of the Sabbath. Moody Institute, how can men claim that this one commandment has been done away with when they will admit that the other 9 are still binding? Look, that's the whole point. We must make a stand for truth. It is so clear throughout history. There is no debatable fact. The Catholic Church has taken ownership of the fact that they've changed it, right? But what does God say? Verily my Sabbath shall ye keep, for it's a sign between us throughout all your generations, that you may know that I'm the Lord that sanctify you. So it's a perpetual covenant, an ongoing covenant. We'll be keeping Sabbath in heaven. Watch my other course on Sabbath truth. So this is a sign. It's an indicator. Right? My Sabbath you'll keep, that you'll know that I'm the Lord that sanctifies you. It's about sanctification. Right? If we hear his voice, we'll follow the Sabbath. If we love him, we'll keep his commandments. If we love him, we'll keep his commandments. That includes the Sabbath. Right? Lucifer knows that if he can get us to break just one of the 10 commandments, we break all of the 10 commandments. And so what is obvious is who we yield ourselves to is our master. If we yield ourselves to tradition, to the Sunday worship, then we get death. If we yield ourselves up unto obedience unto Christ, obedience to the Sabbath and all of the 10 commandments, and a desire for righteousness, then that's what we'll obtain. It's a choice. It's a binary choice. We have to choose a path. Where do we put our trust? In human reasoning or in God? Right? Ultimately, this will decide, will we get the mark of the beast or the seal of God? It's a choice. We have to choose a pill, red pill or blue pill, if you know that analogy. Hopefully you don't know this analogy, but the idea comes down to who we worship. Do we worship the Son God or the Son of God? The S-U-N or the S-O-N? And we decide this based on the day that we worship. It goes right back to the Garden of Eden, right? Right back to how we make a choice. Do we worship on the first day, which is man's tradition? Or do we worship on the day that God asked us to? Ultimately, this is the question we need to ask ourselves, because at the end of it, this is the mechanism that we will show. And we say, well, it's not that big of a deal, right? It's just choose a day to worship. It's not that big of a deal. But this comes back to, who are we placing our trust in? This comes back to, do we want to follow the way that God has told us to, or do we want to just leave ourselves in the way of man? And again, this is just a shorter version. I recommend watching the whole video on Sabbath truth, where I go in deeper, but hopefully this has got you enough to understand that this is not something that God had made any change to change the day of worship. This was a change made by man. It was made by Lucifer and his commander, which is the papacy. And so by worshiping on Sunday, it is by choosing that you will go with tradition and man over studying to show yourself approved. And I just pray that you will really think this about and seriously look into this and figure out what God has to say, because I hopefully have shown you that the text here shows without a doubt that the Catholic Church is the one that changed the date.